okay, so you have this, we understand we need to have this collective focus, right?
Right.
But let's get into the specifics of it, right? So I mean, for example, like we've been talking about the race issue for a while, right?
Right.
And so we're saying that there's a system of control over black people, and it's what's causing all these issues. Malcolm X famously said that Islam, was the solution to the race problem. How so? Like, what is it about Islam other than just it giving an individual sense of I'm no better than any other person in the eyes of God except through my actions, which is what we're told in Islam. Beyond that, what does Islam do collectively to address the race issue?
So, and that takes us back to when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba, when they migrated, Prophet Muhammad, when he migrated to Medina, he was a refugee, right? Like him and his companions were refugees. He was muhajirun. That's they're refugees, right? And we see sort of the attitude of the refugees as we see here in the West, especially with the recent events in Europe. We see how quickly the Europeans are questioning their hospitality, right? So we still understand that kind of thing. And then, of course, the thing is that we sometimes shouldn't gloss over the situation in Medina. It probably wouldn't be any different, right? Like there'd be necessarily because there's, especially in pre-Islamic Arabia, there was tribalism. Tribalism was a massive problem, right? Like it was, the people. I mean, that's why one of the reasons that led to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam migrating was the brutal civil wars they used to have between the Aus and the Khazraj, the two tribes who eventually, decided to bind together and bring Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Medina, right? So tribalism is a rampant issue. So now you have a third mix. So now you have immigrants coming into this community. So what happens? How do we ensure? How is this state? How does it deal with it? Does it just kind of let them sort it out? No, that's not what happened. What happened was, obviously from the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happened was that the Muhajirin were actually made actual brothers with the Ansar, the locals. So for example, what that means is that you would have where they would actually inherit from each other, right? That would be that's how much they became, because as you know, in the inheritance laws, that only happens within your family ties. You're actually blood relatives.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to show you here is that what we understand from a state, that what it has to work towards creating that brotherhood. When you have these kind of racial and tribal problems in a society, they have to take active steps to break down those barriers, right?
So what you're saying is that in Medina, when the immigrants did make it there, the Muhajirun and the Ansar were there, that the Prophet ﷺ, through his government, took tangible steps to ensure that the immigrants, the refugees, whatever you want to call them, the Muhajirun, were like actively living with, inheriting from, and sharing resources with the Ansar. That's right, and that was made at a level not as some kind of some kind of cold kind of structure where you get like some kind of like check or something from like this like unknown person, but they're actually made family. Yeah,
they were actually made into a family with that, and then that later was abrogated.
Yeah,
right. However, the point was at the time that does that, and the point is that what it shows us is that it shows us what is the role of a state, and it shows that there is definitive. This is not news to anyone who's listening to this, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did this, right? And it shows when you want to break down a race problem in society, what you have to do. And so when speakers and other people who take that responsibility neglect to mention or recognize the role of Islam in the public sphere in maintaining this, they miss this. And then therefore, when they come and approach the problem of blacks' oppression or the oppression of Muslims, they fail to recognize the role and obligations of the state and the government in tackling these problems in an active manner, because Allah guided us on that matter. It's not like the Quran was silent on that. The Quran doesn't tell you on how to do science or do accounting, right?
Yeah.
But it does tell you how to fix the race problem in society. And so to get out and when the learned amongst us and the scholars they don't address this problem, then we're not walking the straight path because we don't know it, right? And as we know, the scholars are the inheritors of the Prophet, and may Allah reward all those who are sincere and work day and night to guide the ummah. it's they have to address this, and that, because that will give us those insights into society. And when
Sure.
we interact with other people, and they are trying to understand like what's going on, this gives you that insight. You know,
Yeah.
Islam and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gives you insights in the problem. And as you know, Abdul Qadir was mentioning, it's not. I mean, here in America, took active steps to create divisions between white and black. So they're going the other way, and they're
Yeah.
actively doing it, right?
Sure.
So that's one aspect. But what should they do?
Yeah.
What should they do? When I was reading Michelle Alexander's book, that's what kind of popped in my mind. Is like, what I would, if I could have a chance to, discuss with her, I would say is, hey, look at what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. What did the Prophet Muhammad do to actively break down that race, kind of
Yeah.
problem, right? And address that, and it wasn't just that issue alone. It's like for example, when the Muhajirin and the Ansar started fighting each other in one incident, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam acted immediately to stop that.
Because I mean, if I remember correctly, they were using tribal terms to fight with each other. They were reorganizing themselves according to their ethnic and tribal identity as opposed to their identity as Muslims.
Absolutely,
And so they're making kind of like a prejudiced attack on each other.
Yeah, and it was, and they started calling to each other, to their respective tribes to come together and band together and to do that. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he got there as fast as he could to break that down. That was a mission critical. That was like and he asked him, it's like, I'm not even dead, and you want to go back and pass and you want to go back, and I'm not even dead, and you want to go back to Jahiliyyah, you want to go back to ignorance, right?
Yeah.
So this is the head of the state coming in and coming there as with authority. If he was just a person in society, who would listen to him, right? No, but he's the head of state coming in there, telling people that this is unacceptable, and using his, he's using his the Sahaba's love for him to kind of address them.
Yeah.
And
call them out on their.
Yeah, and call them on this this abandoning of Islam. And I mean the other incident, which I think is also important, was that when Abu Dhar, may Allah be pleased with him, he addressed Bilal, who was black, in a derogatory way, and Bilal complained to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet Muhammad, he addressed Abu Dhar and said, you have jahiliyyah in you, you have ignorance in you. And right away Abu Dhar tried to fix it, and he put his head onto the sand, onto the ground, and asked Bilal to put his foot on his neck, because he wanted to break that concept, right?
Yeah.
And
to break his sense of superiority.
Absolutely, and to make it, like, to internalize that idea that they are equal.
Sure.
Right? And I think that what that illustrates there is that, in contrast to the current system of mass incarceration, which targets African Americans, is that you have the head of state right away, siding when he learned of this racism going on, he right away addressed it. And what one of the most important things is that, for people to realize, that I learned from Michelle Alexander, is that it's impossible in the system to actually sue the system for racism, right? Unless the police officer or the judge or whatever explicitly declares their racism, they cannot. There's no way to prosecute the system for racism, even though that we all know that African Americans get targeted more, and the.
So you're saying that if you're a person of color that's been treated a rough hand by the cops or by the judges, and you're pretty sure, based on a preponderance of evidence, that it was your race that caused them to treat you that way, you can't sue them for racism unless they explicitly tell you.
That's correct.
That they are killing you, or shooting you, or arresting you, or sentencing you because you're black.
Supreme Court, I think they mentioned explicitly, it doesn't matter how overwhelming the stats are to show that there's a racial bias at play. There has to be some form of admission.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we were talking about this before. I don't think like the 14-year-old kid that they lynched in the 60s, Emmett Till, that they did terrible things to him. I can't even get into the details of what they did to him for, touching a white woman, I think, on the hand. She was a cashier or something like that.
Something along those lines.
I don't think the cops would have told him they were killing him because he was black.
Yeah, right.
They would have said they were killing him because he was a thug and because he was, like harassing women and this and that.
Absolutely.
So I mean, they're setting a standard of evidence so high that it wouldn't have been met in the 50s maybe. Imagine it being met in 2016 when race is apparently not an issue anymore.
Yeah, there was
Interesting.
an incident where, just to add, was that where one of the lawyers took this on, like a case on pro bono. I believe was in Georgia where the gentleman was going to the chair.
I believe so.
Yeah. So what happened was it was one of the southern states in where they controlled for I think 30 variables, and the key determinant of whether you were going to the chair or not was whether you were black or white.
Absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
and then that connects back to what Abdulkader said, is that it doesn't matter about overwhelming statistical evidence. I mean, people love to, claim that America's scientific and these types of things, but when you have even these types of studies and all that, it means nothing in the court of law, and really shows you what science and statistical studies really mean. And it shows you that, in contrast to what in Islam, what it shows is that any kind of form of racism, the system must act decisively to ensure that such attitudes are rectified, and that the people are heard, and such attitudes are not welcome in a society.